We are streaming and we are recording.
Nice. Shall we let the people in?
Let's do it.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. We're going to give it a few more minutes before we kick off tonight's webinar. Thanks again for joining us. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the CRTPO's 2055 Metropolitan Transportation Plan webinar. Thank you again for joining us this evening. So what I'll do is I'll start with just some introductions. My name is Neil Burke. I'm the Deputy Director for the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization, and I'm joined by Nat Hayward. He's the consultant from Kimley Horn that's assisting us with the preparation of the 2055 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So obviously the focus of the webinar is on the development of the MTP. We started this planning effort the summer of 2024. We've had two previous phases of public engagement focused around getting feedback from residents in phase one, reviewing the draft roadway and transit project list in phase two. And the focus of phase three is on the draft report, which really culminates the planning effort over the past almost 2 years. This 2055 MTP must be adopted by the CRTPO board in March of this year, and then we must submit the plan to Federal Highway Administration by April of this year. The public engagement period for the third phase began yesterday on January 12th, and it will conclude on February 10th. We are using our website, 2055mtp.org, as really the central location. We have the draft report and numerous other documents that we've been using throughout the plan development process. The main way to engage and provide feedback on the report is through a survey, which Nat will provide more detail about here in a few minutes. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. My coworker Merritt has prompted you all by entering your first and last name and your favorite animal. Please go ahead and do that. But as we move through the presentation, if you have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. We'll also solicit questions verbally at the end of the presentation. This is a brief presentation. I anticipate it taking probably about 20 minutes. There'll be plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. So I'll provide an overview of the 2055 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Nat will cover this third phase of public engagement, and then he'll walk us through the 9 chapters that are included within the 2055 MTP draft document. Then I'll close this out with next steps, and then we'll stop and take questions and comments at the end. So what is the purpose of a metropolitan transportation plan? Many of you may know that the CRTPO is defined as a metropolitan planning organization. We are described in federal law that way as an MPO. One of the requirements of an MPO is to prepare a metropolitan transportation plan every 4 years. This plan must be fiscally constrained. So what that means is we must develop revenue estimates, what we anticipate in terms of transportation revenues to receive between now and 2055. And then we also solicit projects from our member jurisdictions in Iredell, Mecklenburg, and Union counties. We prioritize those projects and we develop what's known as a fiscally constrained project list. That's really the key component within the 2055 MTP. Other requirements state that this MTP considers all modes of transportation, so not just roadway or transit, but rail, bicycle and pedestrian, aviation, and freight. This plan is required to access federal funds for transportation projects. What I mean by that is if we need to have a project funded with federal funds, it needs to be included within our metropolitan transportation plan. And more importantly, this plan every 4 years establishes a policy for transportation improvements across our 3-county planning area. Next slide. So what is an MTP? Why is it important? It establishes a vision for transportation throughout the Charlotte region. It identifies needs and deficiencies. It recommends specific projects and strategies. It creates an action plan for implementation, and it shapes policy and program decisions over the next 4 years for CRTPO. As I mentioned in my intro, we are under a federal deadline to have this plan completed and adopted by our policy board by April 2026. So again, we plan on having this public engagement period open until February 10th. We'll take the results of the public engagement to the CRTPO board in February, and then the CRTPO board will be requested to adopt the 2055 plan in March of 2026. So a schedule, as you can see, we had a lot of activity surrounding plan development in 2025. We completed a land use scenario planning exercise throughout our 3-county planning area in the first quarter of 2025 that envisioned different scenarios focused around telework and different growth development patterns from compact centers that are articulated in many of our jurisdictions' plans to sprawl development or planning as is. We completed the revenue forecast for roadway and transit maintenance and our discretionary funds in the first quarter of last year. We are also required to complete a congestion management process where we identified 42 congested corridors based upon a defined criteria throughout our planning area. And then we had our member jurisdiction staff assign strategies as to how to mitigate congestion along these corridors as an alternative to the traditional capacity adding projects. As I mentioned, this is the 3rd phase of public engagement that we're currently in now. We did have that 2nd phase of public engagement beginning in June and concluding in July of last year. And again, that was focused on the draft fiscally constrained roadway and transit project list. The CRTPO board reviewed those comments following the public comment period in August, and they adopted that fiscally constrained project list, which is incorporated within the draft document in Chapter 7. And then here we are with the draft document. We began authoring the document in the summer of last year. We went through an internal review process. We also had a 2nd round of reviews with our advisory committee, which is staff comprised from our member jurisdictions throughout Iredell, Mecklenburg, and Union. And now we're to a point where we're starting that public review process that began yesterday. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nat Hayward from Kimley Horn. He's going to walk us through the public engagement process and the draft report, the different chapters. So take it away, Nat.
Awesome. Thanks, Neil. It's a great tee up. As you guys can all imagine, with an effort this large, focusing on this 3-county planning area, we needed a really robust, thoughtful, intentional engagement strategy to provide as much opportunity as we could for folks around the 3-county area to engage with the process, understand what we're up to, and provide feedback as needed. And so what I want to do really briefly is, for the benefit of the folks here in the webinar and the folks who may be listening to the recording afterwards, is provide kind of a quick overview of each phase of engagement, what we've heard within each one, how it influenced the process, and then look forward towards today. So we'll start with phase one. Neil mentioned this already. This phase was actually in the summer of 2024. So back in June, July of 2024, phase one was really focused on kicking off the project with the public, creating awareness about what the MTP is, what it isn't, what it influences, and really about listening to the community, understanding what are the needs from a transportation perspective around the planning area. We also showcased existing conditions analysis that we had conducted. What does the data tell us that the needs are? How does that align or not align with public perception? And we also showcased the goals and objectives of the plan that helped drive the plan forward, showcase those to the public, and then those were subsequently adopted by the CRTPO board. So moving out of phase one, we moved into before I get there, I'll mention in phase one, we had a variety of different engagement activities, and a lot of it was focused around our digital engagement. We got a lot of area to cover here across the 3 counties, and so we wanted to provide lots of opportunity for folks to engage with the process without having to come to us. And so we developed. Neil mentioned the 2055mtp.org already. That was the main kind of project hub. Within 2055mtp.org, we would house project resources, other documents, and engagement opportunities. And so in phase one, we focused on interactive mapping, where folks could, via their computer or their phone, could drop pins around their community to tell us places that were challenges for transportation, maybe key destinations they'd like to go through in the community, potential opportunities for improvement as we think about looking ahead towards the actual projects within the plan. And then there was also kind of an associated digital survey as well. In addition to the digital activities, we also wanted to do our best to provide lots of opportunity to engage with folks on the ground. And so the CRTPO project team went out to those 10 or 12 different pop-up events during phase one, and spread across all 3 counties, knowing that often we have to, in order to engage with people, we need to go to them, right, instead of asking them to come to us. And so partnered with local municipalities and communities to set up at local festivals, community centers, things like that, to hold drop-in events where folks could come engage with the process, learn about the plan, provide their input, or simply just grab a QR code and do the survey later as well. One of the things that we know is common within the planning work that we do is that there are often voices that are potentially underinvested in, right, in the planning process, and undervalued and not necessarily given that opportunity. And we wanted to be really intentional about how we engaged with the 2055 MTP to ensure that we felt that everyone had the opportunity to engage should they wish. And so we also developed what we called equity focus groups that we did around the region, where we partnered with lower income, diverse communities that may have been traditionally left out of the planning process, to actually sit down, have a more formatted, facilitated conversation, and gather that feedback that way, and hold it on par with the rest of the engagement that we provided. If you're interested in learning more about the specific results from the phase one engagement, go to 2055mtp.org. You can find our phase one engagement summary, which highlights all the key data, all the key kind of trends and takeaways there, and talks more about how those recommendations were used to to influence the fiscally constrained roadway project that came later in the process. So all that feedback was given directly to staff and elected officials with the member jurisdictions so that they could use it as they were determining which projects they'd like to submit for inclusion within the plan. So moving on to phase two, this was back in the summer of 2025 and was really focused around getting feedback on the draft recommendations within the plan, specifically on the fiscally constrained roadway project list. And so building off of the phase one of the work and the project submission process where we asked jurisdictions, all of our member jurisdictions to submit projects that they would like to be considered within the plan. We then went through a prioritization process with those projects and as well as a revenue projection process to determine which projects could theoretically fit within their horizon year. And then we took that plan, that list to the public, asked them to review it. Obviously, it's a pretty technical thing, and so we tried really hard to be intentional about creating awareness about how the process was developed, how the list ultimately landed, and how they could provide feedback on that. And ultimately, then that feedback was provided directly to the officials in their community and the CRTPO board as they considered adoption of the fiscally constrained project list. And we also created a little bit of a feedback loop here. And so that was a common trend as we go through each phase. We also wanted to showcase what we had heard in phase one and how it influenced to how we got into phase two. And so in phase two, we utilized a lot of the same engagement activities, the digital engagement, where we actually put all the fiscally constrained roadway project lists out for consideration. We allowed folks to click on projects and upvote them and leave other comments as needed. We also went back to our pop-up events going around all around the 3-county planning area to connect with folks, create awareness about the fiscally constrained project list, and gather feedback. Similarly, we went back to the equity focus groups, partnering with many of the same community partners to do those groups. I should also mention that we conducted in phase one and phase two, we conducted meetings in Spanish as well for our non-English speakers in the community. We also held stakeholder meetings where we partnered with agency partners, other local advocacy groups, NCDOT, to have kind of topical conversations around sustainability, economic development, and how transportation can affect those things, and tourism as well. We memorialized all that information within the phase two engagement summary also. Additionally, there were community presentations done and also radio interviews hosted that we participated in Spanish as well to get the word out about the plan and the second phase of engagement in order to drive up some of our participation. And so once again, all of those results can be found at 2055mtp.org. You're going to hear us plug that site a lot during this webinar. All the results can be found in our phase two engagement summary, and you can see how those results influence the process. So now we're in phase three of engagement. And so like Neil said at the top, that started yesterday, Monday, January 12th, and is running through February 10th next month. And so again, creating that feedback loop, we want to highlight what we've heard in the second phase of engagement, how it's continued to influence the process. And then ultimately, it's about making the draft available for public review. And so if you go to 2055mtp.org, you can access the full draft 2055 MTP document. You can go through chapter by chapter, provide specific comments and feedback on each chapter, or you can provide feedback on the plan as a whole through those methods. So we're using our similar kind of digital engagement tools We've added this kind of webinar remote meeting that we're going to record and display on the website as well for folks who aren't able to be here. We've also got a Spanish version of this webinar that's going to occur next week, I believe on the 20th, which is a week from today, I believe. And I mentioned the surveys that we have and the open comment portals that we've got online as well for people that want to review the plan and have feedback that they want to share with us. There's also a variety of other presentations and activities going on, community presentations that could happen with municipal boards, neighborhood groups, other table activities. And we're also kind of setting up around the community, going to libraries and community centers, and just having our team kind of set up, share flyers with QR codes to allow people to create some awareness that the plan is available and hopefully have people engage with the process. Neil, anything else on engagement before I move off this subject?
I think you've covered it well, Matt.
Okay. All right. So our last topic here is the 2055 MTP draft. What is actually in the plan? What makes up the plan? Neil mentioned earlier, it's broken down into 9 different chapters. And so what I'm going to do, hopefully not in too long-winded of a way, is kind of touch on each chapter, talk about what's in each chapter and how it sort of serves as a part of the larger plan and process. So chapter 1 is our introduction. And so this orients the reader to what the CRTPO is, what the purpose of the agency is, provides overview about what an MTP is, what a Metropolitan Transportation Plan actually is, talks about the regulations that are associated with the planning process that sort of guide the requirements that the plan needs to adhere to, and also highlights those goals and objectives that I mentioned earlier that were reviewed during the phase 1 of engagement and then subsequently adopted. And those goals and objectives sort of guide our whole planning process. Chapter 2 is all about the engagement. I've obviously walked through that in a little bit of detail just now, so I won't belabor it here, but essentially we highlight our approach, highlight the boards and committees that were a part of the process. Lots of folks, as you can imagine, were involved in developing the plan. And then we go through each phase, highlighting some of the key takeaways and activities that occurred within each phase. You'll notice an asterisk on phase 3. And so within the plan itself, or the draft version of the plan, as you might imagine, with phase 3 currently happening right now, we don't have any results yet. And so right now there is sort of a page placeholder talking about the types of activities that will likely occur during phase 3. Once phase 3 of engagement finishes, we update the plan with those results, and those will be in the final version of the plan. Chapter 3 is all about the state of the region. So this is essentially our existing conditions chapters. And one of the things that we did, you can see a full report of the existing conditions chapter on 2055mtp.org, is took a snapshot of transportation conditions around the 3-county planning area right now. Of course, we looked at the actual transportation conditions by mode, looking at driving, walking, biking, transit, freight movement, those kinds of things. But we also wanted to take a little bit of a broader approach to understand other community contextual data points that would influence transportation. So demographic factors like vehicle access and income, population density, population growth, those kinds of things influence transportation, especially as we're looking all the way out to 2055. So those key data points and trends are described in this chapter. We also described a comparison of some peer MPOs and regions. And some of those are similar to Charlotte now. Some of those are a little larger, maybe a little more aspirational, just to compare some of those key kind of transportation trends and data points to understand how the CRTPO planning area falls in the context of other regions, similar regions around the country. We also highlighted other regional initiatives like Connect Beyond, Beyond 77, and the CATS Transit System Plan to describe how those regional initiatives dovetail with this process and influence transportation looking forward. And then it concludes with an acknowledgement of those things that are our biggest challenges around the planning area. As you can imagine, a key part of this chapter is not just showcasing the data points that we have access to, but drawing a little bit of a conclusion about what this means for the future of transportation around the region and challenges that we may face. And that dovetails right into chapter 4, which highlights the tools and strategies that we would need to lean into in order to address some of those challenges. So I won't read through all those here, but you can see some of those here. Some of those that were directly a part of our planning process, like scenario planning and the development of a tool for assessing active transportation corridor needs, but also other things as well, looking at environmental mitigation strategies through NCDOT's resilience improvement plan, and knowing how, or discussing how that could be a tool and strategy for addressing our challenges. Neil mentioned our congestion management process earlier. Congestion management process, or CMP, as you might hear folks say, is about sort of understanding congestion corridors within the planning area and highlighting strategies that would be used to address those. And so this chapter walks through that process, highlighting how those links and corridors were identified and the strategies that can be used to mitigate congestion along those corridors. This process worked closely, or developed, or I should say built on the work of the CMP task force, which the CRTPO facilitates and manages. I mentioned earlier that a key part of the process was the revenue forecasting that influences how many projects actually fit into the fiscally constrained portion of the plan. And chapter 6 is really critical to describing that process, to describe the different considerations that we looked at for funding, the different revenue sources, and how those sources were projected over time to make educated assumptions about how much revenue might be available to fund certain projects. We also dive deep into how cost estimations were developed for the various projects, and then ultimately how that was used to demonstrate the fiscal constraint within the plan, which is the requirement. Linked closely to that is chapter 7, which describes all of the projects that are within the MTP, and how those projects were identified through that project submission process I mentioned earlier with the member jurisdictions, how those projects were evaluated and prioritized. There's a scoring methodology that's described here. And then ultimately, all of the projects within the 2055 MTP broken down by roadway projects, active transportation, CATS transit system plan projects, and then rail projects. Chapter 8 is all about evaluating our performance, tracking our progress, measuring our progress as we move forward, as we look towards the horizon year of the plan in 2055. There's federal performance-based planning overview and the requirements that are associated with that. We describe how those things are incorporated within this plan and the implementation process moving forward, and then the other performance measures that will need to be tracked ongoing to measure progress moving forward. And finally, chapter 9, the plan concludes with considerations for the future. Obviously, that starts with monitoring our progress towards achieving the goals and objectives and performance measures of the plan, but also looks at other implementation activities that can support in the implementation of the plan, things like the recent SS4A grant that the CRTPO received. They're going to be working on that plan, as well as potential other programs as well. The chapter here concludes with some best practices for consideration, as well as considerations for the next update to the plan, which would be the 2060 MTP, or potentially just the update to the 2055 MTP, but the next next version of this plan as they move forward. I went through that pretty quick. Neil, anything I forgot to mention?
No, that was a good overview of our 9 chapters within the draft.
Okay. Just to highlight it here, other work we've got ongoing during phase 3. We've mentioned the congestion management process already. That work got finalized during phase 3. I mentioned also the active transportation corridor tool, which was a tool for evaluating corridors and their potential need for active transportation investment. That work was going on during phase 3 as well. Something that will be that is going on right now and will be a part of the final submittal of the plan, adoption of the plan, will be project sheets for all of the MTP projects listed in the plan. Once we get out of the draft phase, we'll develop project sheets for each project that can be accessed as an appendix. I talked about incorporating the performance-based planning measures, and additionally, we leaned on NCDOT's Transportation Disadvantaged Index analysis to incorporate some of that into the planning process also. And with that, I will pass it back to Neil to wrap us up.
Thanks, Nat. And this is our last slide. So as I mentioned before, and as Nat had detailed, we are under public review of the 2055 MTP draft document that began yesterday, and that will conclude next month on the 10th. You can find the draft document at 2055mtp.org. You can use the QR code here to access it, to visit the website, review the draft report, and then take the survey. And as I mentioned, we anticipate our board taking action to adopt the 2055 MTP in March of 2026. So that concludes our presentation. Really appreciate everybody tuning in and participating. And at this point, we will take any questions or comments that the attendees have. I'm looking back through the chat. I don't see any specific questions, but I'll open the floor, or I'll defer to Merritt if there are any questions or comments that we've received.
Yeah, Neil, we received a question from Damian Smith when we were at slide 11, asking anyone in particular. And Damian, if you would like to go off mute or put in the chat what you meant by that question.
Oh, no,
Are you
sorry,
referring to
that was not a question regarding this.
Oh,
But I actually
okay.
do have a comment, which is it's related to the congestion management process, which generally is biased towards reducing vehicle miles. So the amount of time individuals in single-use vehicles, in single occupancy vehicles, end up spending on a roadway. And so how are we looking at actually focusing, because a lot of the fiscally constrained projects end up being road widenings, which aren't actually going to solve our problem. And what are we going to do to actually, I don't know, push for this plan to focus more on mass transit improvements? Because that is a real major concern with a 50% population increase between now and 2050. So that's, you're not going to be able to widen your way out of this problem, is what I'm trying to get at. And what are we going to do to push that sort of thing across the region, or get that so, that's where we're putting our eggs, most of our eggs in our basket.
Damian, thank you for your questions and comments. Appreciate that. As part of the congestion management process for the fiscally constrained project list, the roadway projects that you referenced, all of those are required to, we utilized our jurisdictions to identify strategies for mitigating congestion along those corridors, aside from the scope of those widening projects. So they've identified everything from transportation demand management strategies to transit, to active transportation corridor enhancements, bicycle pedestrian lanes, multi-use paths and things like that. One of the other federal requirements we're under with the CMP is to actually assess those strategies and figure out if we're moving the needle or not on those strategies. And really the CMP is designed to make sure that those strategies are considered first before the physical capacity adding project is actually considered. To your point about transit investment, CRTPO was not directly involved in the referendum, but we did coordinate heavily with CATS on their transit system plan, which is kind of based upon the passage of that referendum, which it did, and the receipt of those revenues. So we do have in our fiscally constrained project list the red line, the silver line, and the gold line, and extensions to the blue line. So this is the first for us to actually have capital transit projects included within this plan. And Nat, if I've missed anything about the CMP or transit investment, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, no, I think you mostly said it. I would just maybe reiterate that within the CMP process, the identification of those strategies is the method with which we can hopefully mitigate some of that congestion without going to a widening project, right? So the goal would be to work through those strategies first before something else is needed.
All right, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them. We have until 7:30 as our official time, so feel free to take the time you need. Not seeing anything in the chat, Neil, so might be time to wrap up early.
Thanks, Merritt. And again, I just want to thank all the attendees for participating this evening. I would encourage you all, if you haven't already done so, to go to the website and review the chapters. The way it's set up, you don't have to review the whole report. You can maybe focus on the chapters that interest you, and the way the survey is set up is you can provide feedback on those chapters and rank them. So really appreciate your interest in CRTPO and the 2055 MTP. We will have another webinar. It'll be conducted in Spanish a week from today. And then also feel free to attend the February and March board meetings, where this will be an agenda item, first of all, in February to review the public comments received, and then in March for the CRTPO board to consider adopting the plan. And you don't have to attend in person. We do stream our board meetings on YouTube. Those start live at 6 o'clock in February and March. But then you can also access those recordings later on. So once again, appreciate everybody's attendance and participation, and I hope everybody has a good evening.